I came across a set of naval records that, according to the archivist, were never supposed to exist. They were stored in a sealed box, misfiled under Routine Cargo Reports, 1918, and buried so deep in the basement of the National Archives that the folder itself was coated with a layer of dust like gray velvet. Inside were papers tied with frayed string, a brittle logbook with pages yellowed to the color of bone, and a single photograph of a massive collier ship, the USS Cyclops. The name alone was enough to stop me. Cyclops was the ship that left Barbados in March of 1918 with over 300 men aboard and never arrived at its destination. No distress call, no wreckage, no survivors. It simply vanished. For more than a century, the disappearance has fueled rumors of mutiny, enemy attack, storms, even the Bermuda Triangle. Officially, the Navy declared it lost without trace. But the logbook I found told a story I've never seen mentioned anywhere. The first pages were exactly what you would expect: neat records of coal cargo, barometric readings, routine notes in a precise naval hand. The dates matched known history up until March 3rd, the day Cyclops departed Bridgetown, Barbados. Then the handwriting grew uneven, cramped, almost hurried. One entry was underlined twice: position lost. Compasses unreliable. Stars misaligned. Another line read, sound of engines distorted. Men complain of vibrations in the air. I could feel my hands sweat as I flipped further. The entries didn't stop on March 4th, or 5th, or 10th. They continued. March 15th, March 20th, April 2nd. Weeks beyond the day the ship should have reached Baltimore. The handwriting grew stranger with every page, as if the pen was dragged by a shaking hand. Dates stretched further, even into months after the ship was officially gone. May, June, July. One note chilled me: crew insists time wrong. Days repeat. Ship not moving but sea still changes. Another, voices below deck when all men accounted for. And then, in a cramped scrawl across half a page, we are being observed. I sat there in the archive basement, the air heavy with dust and silence, staring at the pages until my eyes blurred. It was impossible. These entries shouldn't exist. Cyclops had vanished in March, yet here were logs stretching long after that, written as though the ship had kept sailing in some place outside history. At the bottom of the last page I dared to read, I found a date written in darker ink, the pen strokes heavier as though pressed into the paper with urgency. It wasn't 1918. It was 1920. And below it, a final line: Cyclops will not return, but neither will it end. I closed the book with trembling hands. That was the moment I realized the official story of Cyclops, the one in history books, documentaries, naval records, might be hiding something far stranger than a storm or sabotage. And I couldn't stop myself. I had to keep reading. I went back to the logbook the next day, though part of me wanted to leave it buried in the archive where I found it. I told myself I'd only skim the entries again, maybe photograph a few pages for reference. But the deeper I read, the more impossible it became to look away. The handwriting shifted drastically after the first week of March 1918. It wasn't just hurried, it looked strained, as though whoever held the pen was writing against some invisible force. Letters slanted upward, words fused together. Ink bled through in places like the nib had pressed down too hard. The content was even stranger. Compass swings without reason. Stars overhead wrong. No north. Sextant useless. Engine turns but ship feels still. Crew insists waves move yet we remain fixed. The officer, if it even was the officer, began recording times rather than days. Specific hours, sometimes repeated. 14:07 appeared again and again, circled in black ink. At first I thought it was a coincidence, but as the pages went on, the entries grew more obsessive. 14:07, horizon erased. 14:07, men frozen mid-step. 14:07, sea darker though sun high. Crew complaints filled entire pages. Headaches, nausea, dreams of standing on shorelines they'd never seen. Some swore they heard bells in the night, though the ship had none. Others claimed to see lights beneath the surface of the sea, moving against the current. One fragment caught me hardest. March 24th, day repeats. We wake, coal still stacked as before, work undone. Bread unbaked but crumbs remain on deck. Men losing courage. I paused at that line, thinking about how terrifying it would be to live the same day aboard a steel giant in the middle of the Atlantic, no land in sight, with no way to tell if time was even moving. Then came the first mention of something I couldn't ignore. Observer among us. Cannot locate. Head count full but shadow remains. Page after page, the author circled back to this observer. It wasn't clear if he meant a stowaway, an officer, or something less human. Sometimes he described it directly. When roll called, an extra step on deck. When bread divided, one crumb missing. When silence held, another breath among hours. As the week stretched beyond March, the dates kept moving forward. April, May, June. Always with that same relentless notation, 1407. Then, on an entry marked July 5, 1918, the ink smeared halfway down the page, as though the pen had been dragged by a shaking hand. The words read, "Observer speaks. Voice without mouth. Knows my thoughts before I write them." At that point, my throat tightened. I wanted to close the log, to stop reading. But I didn't. The next entries were fragmented, whole sentences collapsing into a scrawl of repeated words. No return, no return, no return. 1407, 1407, 1407. Endless, see endless, see endless, see. The final legible line before the ink gave out said only, "We have been moved outside the calendar." I remember setting the logbook down on the archive table, my fingers numb. Outside the windows of the reading room, cars passed on a busy DC street, horns blaring, sunlight on glass. Yet in that moment, I felt the same sick dizziness I imagined the crew had felt, the sense that time itself had slipped, and I was reading not history but something that still pulsed, alive, beneath the surface. And then I noticed something I hadn't before. At the very end of the log, pressed faintly into the cardboard of the cover as though etched by a fingernail, was a date. It wasn't from 1918. It was from last year. For the rest of the day I couldn't concentrate on anything else. The faintly scratched date on the logbook's cover haunted me. It wasn't neatly written like the other entries. It looked carved in desperation, jagged, uneven, as though whoever pressed it into the cardboard had no ink left, only their nail. And the year? It was 2022. The archivist who had let me into the reading room noticed how pale I'd gone. He asked if I needed water. I muttered something about dust and excused myself, stuffing the rest of the files into the acid-free folder. But my mind kept circling the same thought. Who could have inscribed a modern date into a logbook sealed away for more than a century? I told myself I wouldn't go back. Yet 2 nights later, I did. The archive basement was silent, its fluorescent lights humming faintly. I slid the folder onto the desk again and began combing through the other papers that had been bundled with the log. Most were cargo manifests, routine naval reports, dry lists of coal weights, provisions, crew rosters. But buried near the bottom was a single envelope, brittle and unmarked, sealed with string. Inside were 2 items, a water-stained letter and a small brass tag on a chain. The tag was etched with the number 407. The letter was addressed to no one. Its handwriting was looser than the logbook entries, the penmanship of someone whose hands trembled. "If this reaches any shore," it began, "know that we remain adrift though the world moves without us. The clocks betray us. At 1407, the sea folds. We return to the same hour, yet the days are gone. I do not know how many we have lost. Perhaps all." Further down, the words grew more frantic. Voices call from the cargo hold, but we dare not open it. We counted the men again, always 309. Yet when silence falls, I hear 310 breathing. I stared at the lines until my eyes watered. The number stuck in my throat, 309. That was the exact crew complement of Cyclops. Yet the writer insisted there was one more. The last paragraph chilled me most. We no longer sail in water but in record. The log writes us even when our hands do not move. I fear we have become only entries, repeating, until some future reader unseals this and becomes the next observer. The signature at the bottom was illegible, just a frantic scrawl. I turned the envelope upside down, and a few flakes of salt fell onto the table. Not dust. Not mold. Salt, as though the paper had been soaked in seawater yesterday, not a century ago. I picked up the brass tag again. The number 407 gleamed faintly under the reading lamp. My pulse hammered in my ears. And then, from somewhere in the bowels of the archive basement, I swear I heard it, a faint, deliberate tick. Not from the room. From the envelope. I snapped the folder shut, shoving everything inside. But the sound didn't stop. Tick. Tick. Each one perfectly spaced, like a metronome buried in paper. When I left the archives that night, clutching my bag to my chest, I couldn't shake the thought that the letter's final warning wasn't just for its intended reader a century ago. It was for me. I couldn't leave it alone. The brass tag with the number 407 felt heavier than its weight should have allowed, as though it carried some significance I couldn't name. All night it sat on my desk, gleaming faintly in the glow of my desk lamp. I thought about the letter's words. The log writes us even when our hands do not move. The next morning I started digging. Officially, Cyclops carried 309 men. I cross-checked multiple sources, naval rosters, casualty lists, even old newspapers. The number was always the same. But tucked into an obscure Navy memorandum dated April 1918, weeks after the ship vanished, I found a line that made my stomach clench. Crew complement uncertain. Some records list 309, others 310. Clarification pending. It was buried in bureaucratic language, nothing more than a clerical note. Yet it confirmed what the letter hinted. Someone, at some point, thought there had been one more man aboard Cyclops. I took the brass tag with me to the Navy Yard Museum in DC, where relics from lost ships were sometimes displayed. Most of the exhibits were dull, rusted instruments, faded photographs, a cracked sextant. But in the maritime archives attached to the museum, a curator helped me find a small box labeled simply, Recovered Effects, Cyclops. The box contained little: a waterlogged boot, a corroded spoon, fragments of rope. But at the bottom, sealed in plastic, was another tag. My throat tightened as I read the number etched into it. 407. The curator said nothing, only shrugged, as though to him it was meaningless scrap. Sometimes tags aren't sequential, he said. Inventory markers, perhaps. But I saw the flicker of unease in his eyes when I showed him the tag from my folder. That night, I returned home with both tags. I laid them side by side on my desk. Identical, down to the scratches. It was as if the same object had been duplicated. I opened the logbook again, flipping to the frantic entries from July 1918. Something I hadn't noticed before leapt out at me. Each mention of the word observer was underlined exactly 4 times. Each time, the line number on the page ended in a 7. The repetition clawed at my mind. At exactly 14:07 on my wall clock, I didn't plan this, it just happened. The brass tags rattled against each other on the desk. Not violently, just enough to make me freeze. The room was still. No vibration, no draft. Yet the metal trembled as though struck by an unseen hand. I snatched them up, shoving them back into the envelope. But before I sealed it, I noticed faint writing inside the flap, so faded it was nearly invisible. I angled the paper toward the lamp until the letters revealed themselves. If you hold the tag, you become the observer. The words blurred before my eyes. My mouth went dry. Because if that were true, then whoever had written it believed the Cyclops hadn't vanished into nothing. It had gone somewhere else. And whatever observer meant, the position wasn't empty. It could pass on, through the logbook, through the letter, through the tags. Through me. I didn't sleep. The words inside the envelope replayed in my mind like a whisper I couldn't shut out. If you hold the tag, you become the observer. The tags lay inside the folder on my desk, sealed away, but I couldn't ignore them. At 2 a.m., I gave up pretending. I set the logbook out, switched on a dim lamp, and placed both brass tags beside it. The silence in the room thickened. The only sound was the faint hum of the lamp and the occasional creak of the building's pipes. Yet when I opened the logbook to the final entries, I swear I heard another sound underneath it all, the slow, steady rhythm of a tick. I traced the last page with my finger, the words scrawled over and over again. No return, no return, no return. The ink was cracked, flaking, but I felt as though the words pulsed faintly beneath my skin. Then I noticed something strange. On the inside back cover of the logbook, hidden in the crease, was a fold, a glued flap I hadn't seen before. My pulse jumped. I pried at the brittle edge until it tore, releasing a slip of paper so fragile I feared it would disintegrate in my hands. On it was a single set of coordinates. The latitude and longitude placed them not far from where the Cyclops was last recorded. But the date scrawled beneath them froze me. March 4, 2023. My mouth went dry. The handwriting was the same jagged script as the rest of the later entries. I set the paper down, trembling, and for reasons I still don't understand, I picked up one of the brass tags and held it in my palm. The moment I did, the ticking sound grew louder. Not from the log. Not from the room. From inside my head. I stared at the coordinates again, and for a second the lamplight flickered. My apartment seemed to darken at the edges, as if the walls were receding into distance. The logbook pages fluttered though no air stirred. And then I saw something that made my heart pound so violently I nearly dropped the tag. New words appeared across the last blank page of the logbook. Ink bled up from the fibers, curling into letters before my eyes. Observer confirmed. 1407. Do not release the chain. The brass tag in my hand burned cold. I slammed the book shut, gasping. My clock read 2:07 a.m. Not 14:07, but the digits stared back at me like an omen. I couldn't stay in that room another second. I shoved the log, the tags, the letter back into the envelope, sealed it, and locked it inside a trunk at the back of my closet. But even after I did, I could still hear the faint ticking in the silence of my apartment. Not constant, but always there when the clock neared 7 minutes past any hour. Tick. Tick. It followed me into sleep. And in my dreams, I was standing on the deck of a great steel ship, fog curling across an endless horizon. Somewhere below deck, I heard hundreds of men breathing. And one more. For a week I tried to live as though the trunk in my closet didn't exist. I told myself that locking the logbook, the tags, and the letter away had severed whatever thread connected me to the Cyclops. I went to work, answered emails, forced myself to meet a friend for coffee. Outwardly, nothing was wrong. But every time the clock slid past 7 minutes after the hour, the silence bent. I would hear it again, faint, steady, deliberate. Tick. Tick. At first I thought it was my imagination, that I was simply primed to expect it. But then it happened in places where silence should have been impossible: crowded subways, busy intersections, the hum of a restaurant. Beneath all the noise, the rhythm pressed through. Not loud, but certain. Like it wasn't sound at all, but something deeper, vibrating under reality itself. By the 5th night, I gave up pretending. I stayed awake in the living room, the trunk only a few feet away, and watched the clock. When the digits changed to 2:07, the tags inside rattled once, sharp and metallic. The sound was small, but it carried through the apartment like a gunshot. The next morning, I opened the trunk. The logbook lay open to its last page, though I had closed it. A new line had been written in the same rigid, mechanical hand. Observer confirmed. Cycle unbroken. And beneath it, a date, March 4, 2024. That night the dreams returned stronger. I was no longer just standing on the deck of the Cyclops. I was below, moving through endless steel corridors. The air was heavy with coal dust and salt, and hammocks swayed in the stillness. Every one was empty, yet I heard hundreds of lungs breathing in unison. And then there was the extra one. Louder. Closer. Always just behind me. I woke with salt on my lips and the faint roll of water in my ears, though my apartment was landlocked. The following day, I combed through naval archives again, chasing anything that could anchor me. In one forgotten drawer, I found an unsigned memorandum dated 1920. The handwriting was different, but the tone was unmistakable. The ship is not lost. It has been displaced. The log sustains the cycle. We are no longer observers, we are observed. I read the line 3 times. The word observed stuck like a splinter. When I returned home, I noticed salt scattered across my doorstep. The air inside the apartment was damp, carrying the faint tang of seawater. The trunk in the closet shuddered once, then went still. I thought of burning everything, the tags, the letter, the logbook. But some part of me understood it wouldn't matter. You can't burn an echo. You can't destroy something that doesn't belong to the calendar. Now, as I write this, it is 1:54 a.m. The ticking is already here, threaded through the walls, louder with each passing minute. In 13 minutes, the clock will strike 2:07. I don't know what will happen when the date in the logbook matches the calendar. Maybe the Cyclops will rise again, steel hull tearing through the waves from nowhere. Maybe I'll simply vanish, folded into the pages like the men before me. But I do know this, I held the tag. And once you hold it, you never stop being the observer.